The demolition crew was already loaded and ready. $40 million in contracts signed, 16 months of planning complete, and I was standing in an empty church at midnight in Geneva, Switzerland, laughing to myself because I had just said out loud, to no one, "If your Jesus is real, let him stop me tonight." I am not someone who laughs nervously. I do not get nervous, but I want you to stay with me through this story, because what happened in that building in the next few hours changed everything I thought I knew about power, about money, about what a man actually is when he is finally alone. Subscribe if you have not already. I think you are going to want to hear all of it. The property was called the Maison de Grâce, House of Grace. It had stood on the edge of the Plain Palais district since 1887, a modest stone building with arched windows and a wooden cross above the entrance that had survived 2 world wars, a flood in 1944, and 137 years of cold Geneva winters. The congregation that used it had dwindled to maybe 40 people, elderly, quiet, no political connections, no lawyers on retainer. When I made them an offer for the land, they prayed about it for 2 weeks and then told me no. I had them out within the month, through legal rerouting and municipal pressure. I had done it a dozen times before with properties across 4 continents. You find the right officials, you apply the right leverage, and eventually the door opens. It always opened. What I planned to build on that site was the Rashid Prestige Club Geneva, the most exclusive private gaming and hospitality experience in Europe. Invitation only. Minimum net worth for membership was 9 figures. The architecture plans were already in the hands of a firm in Zurich. The underground vault had been designed to house a wine collection worth more than some countries' GDP. I had investors from 6 nations waiting on the other end of a phone call. The demolition was set to begin at 6 in the morning. I had flown in from Riyadh specifically to be there when it started, because I wanted to stand on that land and watch the first wall come down. That was the kind of man I was. I did not just want to win. I wanted to witness the winning. But I had arrived a night early. And the keys to the building were in my jacket pocket, because I had arranged to do a final walkthrough with my project manager that afternoon. He had cancelled some issue with the permits. So the keys stayed in my pocket, and somewhere around 11 at night, after dinner alone at my hotel, I found myself driving past the building. Just passing. That is what I told myself. I parked the car. I do not know exactly why. I had been in 7 countries in the previous 3 weeks. The project had taken more out of me than I expected, not because of the work itself, but because of the pushback. There had been a protest 2 weeks earlier. A small one, maybe 60 people standing outside the municipal offices with signs and candles. I had watched the footage on my phone in the back of an SUV. One woman, maybe 70 years old, was holding a photograph of what I assumed was her wedding inside that church. She was not yelling. She was not even looking at the cameras. She was just holding the photograph and standing very still, and something about the way she stood there had bothered me in a way I did not examine at the time. I got out of the car and stood on the pavement in front of the building. The street was empty. Geneva at midnight in November is a particular kind of quiet. The lake was nearby, and you could feel the cold coming off the water even from 2 blocks away. My breath made small clouds in the air. The cross above the entrance caught the light from a street lamp, and it threw a faint shadow down the stone face of the building. I had been raised to believe in Allah. I prayed when I remembered to pray. I fasted when fasting was convenient. I believed in God the way many men believe in God, which is to say, I believed in a version of God who did not interfere with my business. When the church's representative, a younger pastor with a very direct handshake and very steady eyes, had come to my office in Geneva 6 months earlier to make a final appeal, I had told him something that I still cannot fully explain why I said out loud. I told him, "If your Jesus is real, let him come and stop me. I will be on this land the night before demolition. Let him show up." The pastor had looked at me for a long moment. He had not gotten angry. He had not made threats. He had said, quietly, "I will pray that he does." I had dismissed it. I had laughed about it at dinner that night with 2 of my investors. But standing in front of that building at midnight, I remembered the way the pastor's eyes had looked. Not afraid, not defeated, certain. the kind of certain that does not need your agreement to remain certain. I unlocked the door. The air inside was different from the street. Not warmer, but different in some way I could not immediately identify. It smelled like old wood and candle wax and something else, something I did not have a name for, like rain on dry stone. The building had been emptied of its furniture and most of its fixtures. The pews were gone. The altar was stripped. The floor was bare. My footsteps were louder than they should have been, and then, after I had taken maybe 10 steps inside, my footsteps stopped echoing. I stopped walking and looked at the floor. I took another step. Nothing. The sound had simply ceased in a way that had nothing to do with acoustics. I had stood in concert halls and aircraft hangars, and I knew what sound did in empty spaces. It did not do this. The arched windows let in faint light from the street, and that light fell across the floor in long rectangles. At the far end of the building, where the altar had been, there was a raised platform, still intact. And standing on that platform, very still, was a man. I did not shout. I did not reach for my phone. I did not run. I want to tell you I was brave, but that is not exactly what it was. It was more that every instinct I had for physical response simply went quiet. The same way the sound had gone quiet. He was not glowing. He was not surrounded by anything supernatural I can point to and describe. He was standing the way a person stands when they have been somewhere for a long time and are not in any hurry to be anywhere else. He was wearing something simple, linen or something like it, and he was barefoot on the cold stone floor. His face, I cannot tell you everything about his face. Some of it I cannot find words for. But his eyes, I can tell you about his eyes. They were looking at me with an expression I had never once in my life seen directed at me. It was not admiration. It was not judgment. It was recognition. The look you get from someone who has known you for a very long time. My mouth opened. He spoke first. Saeed. That was all. Just my name. But the way he said it undid something in my chest that I did not know had been knotted for years. My name in his voice sounded like it had been known before I was born. Like it had been said, quietly, in rooms I never entered, for my entire life. I managed one word. Who? He said, you already know. And I did. I did not want to, but I did. I had spent 30 years telling myself that the Christian faith was a comfort mechanism for people who could not handle the reality of a world where the strong survive and the clever prosper. I had never said that to anyone but myself, quietly, in the way you say things you are afraid to say too loudly, even in your own mind. But I had thought it consistently, from the time I was 22 and building my first project and watching what money could actually do in the world and what prayer could not. I said, if you were real, I said. My voice came back to me, but it was different, smaller. I said, let him stop me. I know what you said. This is not, I started, and then stopped. I did not know how to finish that sentence. Not a dream, not a hallucination, not a trick of my exhaustion. I knew the difference between those things and this. This was more real than the floor under my feet. He stepped off the platform and walked toward me, and I did not move, and he stopped maybe 6 feet away. The scarred places on his hands were visible in the faint light through the windows. I had known, in the abstract, in the historical sense, what those scars represented. I had thought of them the way one thinks of historical facts, acknowledged, filed, irrelevant to present circumstances. Looking at them now was not like that. You have been running the numbers on this building for 14 months, he said. Projected revenue, projected membership, projected return on investment over a 7-year horizon. Yes, and on the night you first saw the numbers make sense, on a Tuesday evening in your Riyadh office, with the window open and the call to prayer beginning outside, you paused. You sat for almost a full minute, and you did not work. Do you remember what you were thinking? I remembered. I had been thinking about my father, about a specific afternoon when I was 8 years old, sitting with him on the roof of our house, and he had pointed to the moon and told me that God had made that moon for us, that everything beautiful was a gift, and every breath was borrowed. I had not thought about that afternoon in 20 years. It had surfaced that evening in my office like something that had been submerged for a long time, and I had closed the window, opened a different spreadsheet, and made it go away. "You remember," he said, "it was not a question. That has nothing to do with this project. Everything you have done for the last 20 years connects to that moment on the roof, to what you decided to do with what your father told you. I decided to be practical. You decided to be afraid." The word landed harder than I expected. I had been called many things: ruthless, brilliant, visionary, arrogant. Nobody had ever called me afraid and meant it the way he meant it, which was not as an insult but as a diagnosis. "I am not afraid of anything," I said. "You are afraid of needing something you cannot buy. You are afraid of a world where your net worth is not your worth. You have built 31 major properties on 4 continents, and not one of them has your name on it, because some part of you, a part you have never looked at directly, knew that if your name was on those buildings and the buildings were all you had, then you were less than the buildings." My jaw was tight. I said nothing. "The congregation that used this building," he said, "had 41 members when you began the legal proceedings to acquire the property. You know that number. It is in your files." 42, I said, before I could stop myself. He looked at me. "One of the members died 6 weeks into the proceedings," I said. "An elderly man. There was a note in my briefing file. I did not read the name, but I had read it. I remembered it now, with a clarity that had no business existing. Emmanuel Bornet, 81 years old, widower, had attended the Maison de Grâce for 53 years. He sat in the 3rd row," Jesus said. "Left side. He had a particular way of holding his hat in his lap during the service. He prayed for you by name, Said, for the last 4 weeks of his life, after he read in the local paper that you were the man behind the acquisition. Something was happening in my throat that I was working very hard to prevent from reaching my face. He did not pray that you would fail," he continued. "He prayed that you would find what you were looking for. He did not know what I was looking for. He knew better than you did." I turned away. I walked 3 steps toward the wall and put my hand flat against the cold stone. The stone was solid and real, and the temperature of it was exactly what stone feels like, and I was not dreaming. "I have built hospitals," I said, to the wall, to myself, to him. "I have donated to foundations. I gave $30 million 2 years ago to a water infrastructure project in 3 countries. I am not a man who takes without giving." "I know every check you have ever written," he said, "and I know why you wrote most of them, not all. Some of them came from a better place. The water project, that one was different. You wrote that check at 3 in the morning in a hotel room in Nairobi after watching a news segment about a child who had walked 4 hours for water. You did not tell anyone about that donation for 8 months. I had not told anyone about it. My communications team had eventually found out and wanted to issue a press release. I had refused. I had not examined why I refused. It had just felt wrong to put my name on it." "That was you," he said. "The real version of you. The one that still existed underneath everything you built on top of it." I turned back around. He was still standing exactly where he had been, patient, unhurried, like he had nowhere else to be, and like wherever he had come from, time there ran by a completely different set of rules. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "I want you to see something." And then it began. I do not know how to describe what happened next, except to say that I stopped being in the room and started being inside my own life, but from the outside. Every significant decision I had made in the previous 30 years, I experienced from the perspective of the person on the other side of it. I was a young man in Marseille, a property manager named Thierry, who had worked for a company I absorbed in 2004. I had restructured immediately after acquisition, which was standard, which was efficient, which was correct from every financial and strategic perspective. I felt what Thierry felt when he came home that evening to his apartment and stood in the kitchen for 20 minutes before he was able to tell his wife he had been let go 3 weeks before their son's surgery. I stood in that kitchen. I felt the weight of that silence. I was a woman in Lagos named Adaeze, whose small hotel I had outbid and outmaneuvered for a prime waterfront parcel in 2011. I had not done anything illegal. The market was the market. But I felt the moment she understood that the bid had gone against her, that the project she had spent 6 years building toward was finished, and I felt the specific texture of that particular kind of defeat, the kind where you have done everything right and lost anyway, because someone with more resources decided they wanted what you had built toward. I was a man in my own country, in Riyadh, a contractor named Faris who had submitted an honest bid for a project and lost it to a competitor who had paid a facilitation fee to the right official, a process I had not personally directed but had not personally stopped when my project manager mentioned it. I felt Faris driving home. I felt him making a decision not to tell his business partner the real reason they had lost the bid, because the real reason would have required him to explain that the system was rigged, and he had no idea how to say that out loud. I do not know how long this lasted. Time was not working correctly. What I experienced felt like weeks, months, a long, uninterrupted accounting of the distance between what I had built and what it had cost. Not in money, in people, in the specific human weight of every efficient decision I had ever made. And then it stopped. I was back in the room. My knees were on the cold stone floor. I did not remember deciding to kneel. The light through the windows had changed, and I looked at them, and the sky outside was the deep blue-gray that comes in the last hour before sunrise. He was still there. I did not set out to hurt people, I said. My voice was very quiet. I know. I believed the system was the system, that someone was going to build what I built, that if it was not me, it would be someone who cared less. Some of that is true, he said. And some of it is a story you told yourself so you did not have to feel what you just felt. I was quiet for a while. The building, I said. The church. The people who used it will find somewhere else to gather. They are resilient. But that is not the real question you are asking. What is the real question? You are asking whether it is too late. You have been asking that question quietly for about 6 years. You have not said it out loud, because saying it out loud would require admitting that you believed there was something to be late for. I looked at the scars on his hands again. I had spent 30 years keeping a comfortable intellectual distance from the meaning of those scars. Standing 3 feet away from them, that distance was not available to me. In my faith, I said slowly, we believe that Isa was a prophet, a great one, but not. I know what you were taught, he said. And I know the questions you have had since you were 19 years old, and read the Sermon on the Mount in a hotel room in London because it was the only book in the drawer and you could not sleep. You read it twice. You told no one. I had told no one. You underlined one verse, he said, in pencil. You erased it before you left the room. Blessed are the merciful, I said, for they shall obtain mercy. The silence that followed that exchange was the fullest silence I have ever been inside. Not empty, full, the way a room is full when the right person is in it. I am not a man who knows how to be merciful, I said. You are a man who has not practiced it. That is different. What do I do? He did not give me a list. He did not give me instructions. What he did was look at me with that expression of recognition, that look that said he had known me before I knew myself. And he said, you already know. The same way you knew what this building meant to the people in it. You knew, Saeed. You have known for a long time what the other version of your life looks like. You chose this one because it was safer. Safer. When you do not need anything from anyone, no one can take anything from you. That is the logic you have been living inside. I thought about my father on the roof, the moon. Everything beautiful is a gift and every breath is borrowed. He would not have approved of me, I said. My father. He prayed for you every day until he died. I put my face in my hands. I do not know how long I stayed like that. When I raised my head, the light through the windows was the first pale grey pink of sunrise. He was still there. The contracts, I said. What about them? If I tear them up, the investors, the municipal officials, the Zurich firm, the legal implications alone. I know what it costs. I am talking about a project worth over $1 billion when you account for projected. I know exactly what it costs, he said. I am asking you what it is worth. That question sat in my chest like a stone. I thought about Thierry in his kitchen. I thought about Adaeze. I thought about Faris. I thought about Emmanuel Bornet in the third row, left side, holding his hat, praying for me by name. I thought about what the man standing in front of me had given up for people who did not know his name, had never said thank you, had never stopped for one night to ask whether any of it was real. "Will you stay?" I asked. I do not know exactly what I meant by the question, whether I meant in the room, in my life, in reach. "I have been here the entire time," he said. "The question was always whether you would stop long enough to notice." I do not remember him leaving. I do not remember standing up. What I remember is that the room was empty and the light through the windows was gold, and I was standing in the middle of the floor with my hand against my chest, and I was breathing very slowly, and I was different, not in a way I could explain to anyone who asked. In a way that I knew would change every decision from that morning forward. I walked outside. The air hit me, and I stood on the steps of the Maison de Grace and looked at the street. A pigeon was walking along the curb. A bakery 2 blocks away had turned on its lights. The lake was invisible, but I could smell it. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes, and I thought about how many mornings I had woken up in how many cities and gone immediately to my phone, immediately to the numbers, immediately to the next thing, without a single moment of just standing in the air and noticing I was alive. A car turned onto the street, then another. The construction crews were arriving. I walked down the steps toward the first truck. The foreman, a practical Swiss man named Andreas who had overseen 3 of my previous projects, climbed out and shook my hand and said, "Ready, Mr. Al-Rashid? We have a good crew and the weather is holding. Pull everyone back," I said. He looked at me. "Call the other trucks. I want every piece of equipment off this block." "Mr. Al-Rashid, the contracts." "I know what the contracts say. I wrote them." I was already reaching into my jacket. I had a copy of the primary demolition agreement in the interior pocket, which I had put there the previous evening to review over dinner, and then had not touched. I took it out. Andreas watched me with an expression caught somewhere between professional concern and personal alarm, as I folded the document along one of its creases and tore it in half. I handed him the halves. "I will handle the investors personally," I said. "Get the machines off the street." I have been asked many times since that morning what I was feeling when I did that. The honest answer is that I was not feeling anything except completely clear. The kind of clear that comes when you have spent a long time carrying a weight you pretended was not heavy, and then you put it down, and the relief is so complete that it takes a moment to register as an emotion at all. The legal proceedings that followed were complicated. I will not pretend they were not. I took significant losses. I paid significant penalties. 2 of my investors were furious enough to sever relationships entirely, which affected projects beyond the Geneva site. My CFO sat across from me in a conference room in Riyadh 3 weeks later with a printed summary of total projected losses and slid it across the table without a word, just slid it across and looked at me with an expression that asked the question he was too professional to say out loud. I looked at the number. I pushed the paper back. "Begin the process for land use conversion," I said. "I want to talk to an architect about community facilities, medical, vocational, emergency housing, food. Mr. Al-Rashid, the surrounding parcels we acquired as part of the site development are fully ours. No legal complications. I want to build something on them." "What kind of something?" "The kind that helps people," I said. "Get me options." What became the Center Plain Palais opened 18 months after that morning. It occupies the land adjacent to the Maison de Grace, which I have since transferred back to the congregation through a permanent charitable trust. The center offers 300 free meals per day, a vocational training program that has certified 412 people in trades since opening, emergency housing for families in displacement situations, and a medical outreach clinic staffed by rotating volunteer physicians that sees patients regardless of their ability to pay, their religion, their documentation status, or anything else. The name above the entrance is not mine. I am not on the letterhead. 3 people who work in the building know that I am involved in the funding. I have asked all 3 of them, repeatedly, not to mention it. The congregation at the Maison de Grace has grown. The last number I heard was 217 members. I have attended the Sunday service there 4 times. I sit in the back. I do not sing because I do not know the songs yet. But I am learning. I have been learning, slowly, in the way that real learning works, not as a project with a timeline and a deliverable, but as something that unfolds when you stay quiet long enough to let it. I spoke to the pastor. The one with the direct handshake and the steady eyes. About 2 months after the morning in the building, I sat in his office, which is small and full of books, and I told him what had happened. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which took a long time. When I finished, he was quiet for a while, and then he said, "He came. Yes. I prayed that he would," he said. "I will be honest with you, I prayed it with everything I had, because I did not know what else to do, and because I had a feeling about you that I could not explain to anyone logically." "What kind of feeling?" "That you were close," he said. "That underneath all of it you were very close. People who are truly far away do not issue the kind of challenge you issued. They just do not think about it. You were thinking about it." I have thought about that conversation many times since, about what it means to be close to something and not know it. About all the years I spent in motion, in production, in construction, building floors above the thing I was actually looking for. There is a moment I return to often, not the encounter itself, though I return to that too, but a specific moment inside it, when he said my name for the first time, just my name, nothing else. And the way it felt to hear it said by someone who had known it longer than I had, who had said it in places I would never see, who had been tracking the distance between who I was and who I could be for my entire life, with something I can only describe as patient hope. I was 53 years old on that November night in Geneva. I had spent 30 years building things I was proud of, in the way you are proud of a very large number on a very important document. I had not built a single thing I was proud of, in the way my father was proud on that roof, pointing at the moon, telling me that everything beautiful was a gift. The Center Plain Palais is the first thing I have built that I am proud of in that second way. There is a woman who comes to the meal program every Tuesday and Thursday. She is in her mid-80s, and she always brings a small cloth bag with her, and she always thanks whoever serves her food with a formality that would seem excessive if it were not so clearly genuine. One of the staff members told me her name last spring. I looked it up. She is the woman from the photograph at the protest, the one who was standing very still, holding a picture of her wedding at the Maison de Grace, not looking at the cameras. Her name is Geneviève. Her husband died in 1999. They were married in that building in 1961. The day I found that out, I sat in my car outside the center for 15 minutes before I went inside. I was not crying exactly, but I was something adjacent to crying, something that felt like a long bill finally being paid. I went inside and I helped set up chairs for the afternoon session, and nobody there knew who I was, and the work was ordinary and physical, and I was grateful for every minute of it. There is a kind of richness, I know now, that has nothing to do with what you own. That is not a new idea. That is, I suspect, one of the oldest ideas there is. But knowing it as a sentence and knowing it as a lived fact are entirely different experiences, and I would not trade the second for anything I have ever purchased or built or leveraged or won. The man I used to be would have read this story and said it was weakness, dressed up as wisdom. The man I am now knows that it is the other way around. If you are somewhere in the middle of the life you built, and something in this story landed in a place you were not expecting, I want you to sit with that for a moment. The things that land unexpectedly usually land in a place that was already waiting for them. I was a billionaire with contracts in 16 countries and a reputation that preceded me into every room I entered, and I could not move or speak until I was ready to be honest about what I actually needed. None of us are as far from that as we think. That is the thing I would most want you to remember. Not the money I gave up, not the center I built, just that. None of us are as far from that as we think. And if you have felt that pull, that quiet, persistent pull towards something you have not let yourself name yet, then I believe you already know what I am talking about. I believed in the momentum of my own life for 30 years, and it took one night in an empty building in Geneva for me to discover that something else had been moving alongside me the entire time, waiting for me to stop long enough to turn around. If you found something in this story that matters to you, I would be grateful if you subscribed. There are 2 more stories on your screen right now that carry the same spirit this one does. Stories about what happens when people stop running long enough to see what is actually in front of them. I hope you click one of them, and I will see you on the other side of it.